Welcome back to the channel. I'm Gambito Gaming, and welcome back to more strange cut content from video games. I've only ever done one episode on this topic in the past, but with so much cut content out there that never made it into the final releases of their games, I figured there's a lot more room to talk about this strange content. Today's video will actually be a little bit shorter than typical videos to give myself a little bit of a break on the editing side. You know, it gets a lot with the 35+ minute videos. Plus, I wanted to get you guys another video before the end of the month, so apologies for the shorter runtime today. Otherwise, you know, let's go ahead and hop into today's strange cut content from all our favorite games. Conker's Bad Fur Day was a game nobody really expected to be as adult and mature as it ended up being, but even for Rareware developers, it seems like there were some lines they were trying to cross but couldn't, which is really wild considering some of the things they did put into the final release of the game. I mean, look at some of this. What's actually going on? You know, most of these scenes were made to be humorous takes on adult topics in a South Park type of manner, but when the humor seemed to be lost and the scene remained just dark, it was time to get it out of the game. I'm of course referencing a very dark cutscene that didn't end up making it into the final version of Conker's Bad Fur Day. During the later sections of the game, you'll enter into an all-out war against enemies known as teddies, of which there are a few variations of this enemy, all of which are supposed to be representations of Nazis from World War II. Fun fact, teddy bears can be Nazis too, according to Rareware. Among the many references to World War, there was a cutscene that can be found in the game's backend that showed a different cutscene from the original one, where Conker first runs across a couple medical teddies. In the final version of the game, the cutscene plays out where Conker walks into a medical bay who sees two teddies breaking the fourth wall, talking about the video game they're currently in, before realizing Conker just entered, yelling they need to get back in character, before comically acting like crazed teddy bear soldiers. It's a pretty humorous, and besides the blood and real-world references, the scene is just as silly and dumb as any of the others in the game, but the original cutscene was vastly different. Conker would enter in the same way, even saying the same things, but instead of the two teddies smoking and shooting the shit, they are now hard at work dissecting a soldier from Conker's army. The soldier is even revealed to be alive as the cutscene shows the excruciating last moments of the soldier's life, being worked on as if it were a corpse, but of course it's still alive. A likely real-life occurrence that happened all too often in wartime, but hey man, that doesn't mean you need to kill the whole tone of the game by including a little too realistic depiction of this torture. You know it's really bad when the GTA 5 torture scene plays off better than this one. Nintendo was the first to note just how dark the scene was and requested the scene to be cut and replaced with a much more tame cutscene, which is the more humorous, lighthearted one we have now. Now, while the creatures in the cutscene are cute little animals, the actions depicted are still too horrific, and hey, it might even disturb those animal lovers a little bit more than if these were real people. I think the whole idea of Conker's existence might have been at risk if this cutscene would have made it in the game, and that the game was a humorous take on adult humor mixed with a classic 3D platformer game, and this cutscene would have proved that there's a point in which a game like this can be taken too far. And this was it, no doubt. I mean, maybe if they did a 9/11 reference, which hadn't even happened by then, so that would have been really impressive. The cutscene, still visible in its full form, might just be one of the strangest, darkest pieces of cut media from the N64 generation, and shows just how far Rareware was willing to try and take this game. I haven't played Dead by Daylight in a minute. I don't know, the game gets a little stale for me after 200 hours. But apparently I should go back now because over half the roster of killers since I stopped playing a couple years ago is brand new, at least to me. And especially since a lot of the killers and survivors are now third-party characters, the game's looking pretty sick. I mean, if there was ever a DLC to get me back into the game, it would be the Castlevania DLC. I mean, that shit sold me on Dead Cells after years of pretending I'd get to it one day. I was never gonna get to that shit. But I digress. We're not talking about Dead by Daylight's successes over here. We're talking about their failures and scrap content. With almost 40 killers and survivors in the game, it's pretty surprising that there aren't a bunch of cut killers and survivors just bursting at the seams, but it's actually quite low. The two main cut killers are the ones I'd like to talk about today, with both having pretty interesting backstories and reasons for being cut. The first one is known as the Smasher, and like his name implies, this guy would have been able to smash about anything in the map, as the description for the creature entails. We're talking not only barriers and windows here, but full-on walls, trees, and rocks. fix anything you can see in the map. If you've never played Dead by Daylight, then you probably don't know how absolutely fucked up this would have been, but it's pretty easy to catch on to why. Matches last up to about 10 or 15 minutes on average, and in that time, even if the Smasher only destroyed half of the map, it would have put survivors at a severe disadvantage, getting rid of obstacles to run the monster around and places for survivors to hide. I like to think the worst case scenario for this is just a flat playing field with a bunch of generators for survivors and the Smasher standing on the other side of the map, and absolute devastation, just debris everywhere. Although in reality, players would have likely just destroyed useful things to the survivors, basically making it extremely difficult to escape, not to mention just how much more programming this would have spelt for future maps, making them all possible to be destructible and compatible with the Smasher Killer. So not only would the Smasher Killer been the most OP killer, it would have caused longer development times for maps, and likely would have changed the route of the game in the long run, even if just time-wise. There aren't any visuals we have of the Smasher, so we have no idea what it would have looked like, but I just imagine a large Kabutops type Pokemon head on a bodybuilder's body, running around the level, head down, full sprinting everywhere. Maybe he's even throwing his hands out in the back like a little anime run, you know what I'm saying? A little Naruto. The next killer that isn't fully cut but reworked into an existing killer is known as the Teacher. The Teacher actually has a few shreds of evidence left in the game's files proving its existence, like a survivor item, a killer item, and even a unique killer perk. The killer's item revealed that the Teacher would have likely used a ruler modded with a blade at the end of it, really cementing the fact that they would have really went full-fledged into the Teacher theme. And hey man, that might have actually caused some old bad memories from people who went to a Catholic school. At least those nuns never had the razors at the end. Jesus. I think it was a really cool theme to explore, but without more evidence of the Teacher's movesets, attacks, and any other perks, it's hard to tell how she would have turned out. The Teacher actually ended up being transformed into the infamous nurse killer in the final game, and if that's anything to go by, it seems like the Teacher had a pretty good chance of being overpowered. Visually, much like the Smasher, we don't have any visuals or models of the killer, but for me, I just visualize Mother Gooseberry from Outlast Trials. I feel that's it's a pretty safe bet there. Since these were killers that were being developed early on in the game's history, they likely wouldn't have stood out nowadays amongst the many killers that have been added in since, but seeing a different timeline of Dead by Daylight play out with these killers being present early on would have been pretty interesting to see. Maybe it wouldn't have done anything at all to the game's popularity, but I really think they dodged a really big problematic bullet with that Smasher. No matter how cool he sounded as a killer, he just wouldn't have worked. Fallout houses a lot of strange post-apocalyptic gremlins, ghouls, stuff to find, but the most terrifying never even got a chance to be in the game. If the name Maypole doesn't sound familiar to you, it probably will after this. The Maypole was set to be an enemy featured in Fallout 4's vast wasteland that would have been a gargantuan glowing one mob that is typically just a ghoul who has been overexposed to radiation to the point where they start glowing. The difference here being the Maypole would have stood at extreme heights of over 300 feet over the player, and would have acted as a spawner of sorts for other enemies, spawning countless enemies until it was killed. The creature was purely a passionate inclusion from Jonah Loeb, who worked as a character artist on Fallout 4, referencing inspirations like Shadow of the Colossus for the creature's overly large design. The full idea would have never worked in the game due to its large size and the amount of processing power just to keep the guy on the map at all times. We gotta remember, you know, this game released almost a decade ago at this point, and the game barely ran without this big-ass Hulk flavored lava lamp being in it, you know, so this would have it wouldn't have worked. The Winter of Adam expansion to the role-playing book/board game added a character that many assumed was the remnants of the Maypole making its way into the Fallout universe in a more realistic way. This enemy is known as Dawn, and of course appears in the spin-off Fallout, the role-playing board/book series. This creature took on a very similar look as the Maypole, but still didn't do the creature justice, as this could have only existed in the game's universe to be as effective as I think Jonah initially wanted it to be. And I totally agree with this comment on a video talking about the Maypole, stating, "I can imagine the Maypole being in the game, not as an actual enemy you can fight, but rather as a presence. Whenever lightning strikes during a rad storm and you can just barely see its silhouette just looming in the distance. Much like how my megalophobia is triggered by many different games, this would have been no exception, and with what is shown and what Jonah Loeb has spoken about the creature, it would have without a doubt been one of the most unnerving enemies in the Fallout series, at least for me. Another comment stated that the existence of the Maypole would have made for some continuity errors in the universe, stating, "The concept of the Maypole is awesome, but it would definitely be hard to explain a ghoul the size of a redwood tree when even super mutant behemoths only get to around 20 feet tall." This sentiment makes sense, and with the limitations during development and the creature seemingly not fitting the world presented through the games, it seems the Maypole never stood much of a chance to make it into the game. But that doesn't matter, because even in its earliest forms, the Maypole still gives me chills, and seeing it in the world would have been an amazing thing to see. I guess it's to the modding forums for us. The 10-year anniversary is coming up, might be a good time for it. Marvel Ultimate Alliance was one of the first games to group up a bunch of superheroes besides the X-Men in games like X-Men Legends. The game was being published by Activision and was set to release on a bunch of consoles with many changes between each. This was definitely back in the day when developers had to develop like 3 crazily different versions of the same game, all to sell them as the same version of the game, not changing things like the cover art, title, or anything about the game from the higher end console versions. Man, I'm so glad this trend died. I can't imagine stacking any more work on game developers' plates nowadays than they already have. One of the most interesting of these alternate versions of Ultimate Alliance was the Wii version, which many games got a special treatment for the Wii version of their games since the console was so different from the competitors at the time, including things like motion controls and inferior specs, and Nintendo as a company to answer to, which is probably the worst one. It was no easy task, but those Wii sales numbers made it a must for most companies to get their games on the damn thing. I mean, it was selling like hotcakes. In Marvel Ultimate Alliance's case, the game definitely got its fair share of downgrading, but perhaps the biggest change never even made it into the game. Back in the day, video game crossovers were just as prominent and impactful as they are now, and Nintendo is just as stingy with their characters as they were back in the day. There is a reason you don't see a lot of Nintendo characters outside of their respective universes, mainly being Nintendo's trust issues with other developers not meeting their strict expectations, but even with this, we did still see Nintendo exclusive content in certain games like Link and Soul Calibur 2 on the GameCube. Being Hopeful, a senior artist from Vicarious Visions, the team developing the Wii version of the game, proactively added in models for Samus Aran and Link into the early versions of Ultimate Alliance on the Wii. These would have acted as exclusive characters to the Wii version of the game, similar to the Soul Calibur 2 situation, but it seems like the artist jumped the gun a little too early, and when shown to Nintendo, they were asked to remove the characters from the game. The reason is unclear, but it likely stems from the same reason they deny every other opportunity like this, out of worry it's not going to be done right. I gotta say, in terms of video game crossovers, this has got to be one of the strangest I've ever seen, and it can be visualized by these videos from the portfolio of this artist, and it seems like the characters made it a decent way into production, featuring full animation sets, attacks, and the whole nine. Hell, Samus can even be seen entering the Morph Ball. That's cool as shit. I gotta say, seeing Samus in the footage doesn't feel as weird as Link. She seems like she'd have the best chance of seamlessly entering the Marvel universe, but watching a medieval blonde-haired elf running around a Marvel-themed space station just, it's not working in my head, man. It's like if they added Mario to the new Call of Duty as a general or something, but instead of making him look realistic and like an army general, they literally had the N64 version of Mario walking around giving orders out and never explained it. Not to say it wouldn't have been straight heat to walk around Ultimate Alliance as these two. I'm not saying that at all. And given the large cast of playable characters, it's not much to add 2 more to the roster. Especially if this means more people would have gravitated towards the Wii version of the game over others, thanks to the exclusive content. You know, maybe if the developers made Spider-Man wear Link's clothing, or made Magneto wear an orange variation of his outfit, it might have made it past Nintendo, because they've allowed that plenty of times, but it seems having the literal characters in the game was too much. I mean, the Zelda timeline is already so confusing and fucked up as it is. Imagine trying to explain the one time Link went to fucking space to fight Venom. Where does that play into place? I think it's right after Majora's Mask, personally. Looking back, man, the Breath of the Wild development process seemed like a hellscape. Seeing the developers not only develop one of the biggest Zelda experiences to date, but also building the game on 2 different console generations in a span of only 6 years. So there should be no surprise to how much cut content there is in the game, but perhaps the most impactful ones come in the form of a race of people known as Minish or Picori. The Minish originally showed up, of course, in the Minish cap on Game Boy Advance, and haven't really been featured or talked about to that extent since the game released. The Minish race are the ones responsible for leaving rupees and other goodies around Hyrule and in the tall grass, so technically they are featured in most Zelda games, at least the ones where you can mow lawns for a living. There is, however, a lot from the early development of Breath of the Wild that shows the Minish might have come back in a big way. This was first discovered after Nintendo released a video titled The Making of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, in which they showed a lot of concepts from the early development of the game. Among these reveals was the reveal of a cut group of tiny people who would have been interactable, and even featured the ability for Link to shrink down in size and talk to the tiny race. They never confirmed if these were the Picori from the Minish Cap, but during this segment they do cut to Minish Cap gameplay, all but confirming this was an early implementation of this race back into the game series. This is disputed by some fans, since officially it's stated that the Minish race is only visible to children, and clearly this version of Link is no longer a child, and minus the 100 years he was asleep, he's still clearly an adult here. So this would mean that Link wouldn't have been able to talk to these people if they were truly Minish, but this has never been confirmed or denied. So what would have the Minish race have done in the game? That's a big question. Many believe and theorize that they might have been a potential 5th champion for Link to go and save, even granting Link the ability to shrink down and gain access to the Minish village featured here in this concept art. However, this is purely speculation, and they could have just been another town for Link to visit, like Kakariko Village and the Sheikah. There are some other theories that the Minish race would have been the original plot point to where the Tarrey Town side quest is located in the game. This is obviously another speculation with no official confirmation, but since the early concept image of the Minish takes place on a grassy hill of sorts, it seems to be the best fit for where these Minish might have been located. If the champion theory is true, this would have added quite a lot to the game's runtime, including a whole other champion dungeon on top of the other 4 in the game, changing the game for the better or worse. I'm not sure, but these guys seem to be really cool, and I always do find it super charming when you can shrink your character down into miniature size in different video games. If you want to see a more detailed breakdown of this cut content from Breath of the Wild and more context about the Minish race and Minish Cap, I highly recommend checking out this great video breakdown of this cut content by Hyrule Gamer. A link will be down in the description to check out that video. And that'll do it for today's episode. If you like to check out the original episode of the series, check the description down below. It'll be linked down there. Also, if you feel like you have a good entry for the series, let me know down in the comments, as always. I also recently launched the channel membership section for the channel. If anyone is interested in that and supporting the channel further, you'll also get extra videos to watch along with channel emotes and badges and all that. No worries if you can't, though. I always appreciate all the support on these videos. And I'll see you all next month. Thanks for watching. Peace.